Admiral Kethfer stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching death approach through the stars. The biomechanical creatures of the Void Swarm moved like living nightmares across space, their twisted forms pulsing with alien hunger. Each one was the size of a battleship, but they moved with the fluid grace of predators. "Distance to enemy formation?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. 12,000 kilometers and closing fast, sir, replied his tactical officer, a young Zephyrian, whose blue-scaled hands trembled over the control panels. "They're moving in that same pattern again, like they're hurting us." Kethfer nodded grimly. The Void Swarm didn't just attack, they hunted. For 2 years, they had swept across the galaxy, consuming everything in their path. 17 different civilizations had fallen to them. Each time, the swarm learned something new, adapted to new weapons, grew stronger. "All ships, prepare plasma cannons for maximum discharge," he ordered into his communication device. Around him, the bridge crew worked frantically at their stations. These were good soldiers, veterans of a dozen conflicts, but none of them had ever faced anything like this. The first wave of swarm creatures hit the Zephyrian defensive line like a hammer blow. Kethfer watched on his tactical display as his ships opened fire with everything they had. Brilliant streams of superheated plasma lanced out across space, striking the biomechanical monsters with enough energy to vaporize a small moon. For a moment, hope flickered in his chest. Several swarm creatures reeled back, their organic hulls glowing white-hot from the plasma strikes. But then something impossible happened. The damaged sections began to shift and change, the alien flesh adapting, hardening, becoming resistant to the very weapons that had just wounded them. "Sir, our plasma cannons are having reduced effect," reported his weapons officer, disbelief clear in her voice. "It's like they're learning to resist the energy signatures." "Switch to kinetic bombardment," Kethfer commanded. "Fire everything we have." The Zephyrian ships launched a storm of metal projectiles, massive slugs designed to punch through the heaviest armor. The rounds struck home, tearing chunks from the swarm creatures. But within minutes, those wounds were healing, and worse. The creatures' hulls were growing thicker, denser, harder to penetrate. The swarm counterattack came without warning. Organic weapons that looked like twisted cannons opened fire from the creatures' bodies, launching streams of bioacid that ate through the Zephyrian ship's energy shields like they were made of paper. Hull plating dissolved on contact, exposing the delicate electronics and crew compartments beneath. "The Radiant Dawn is taking heavy damage," his communications officer shouted over the growing chaos. "Captain Morseth reports multiple hull breaches. They're losing life support on decks 4 through 7. Kethfer gripped the railing of his command platform as his own ship shuddered under enemy fire. Through the main view screen, he could see one of the swarm creatures latching onto the hull of a nearby cruiser. Organic tendrils, thick as tree trunks, burrowed into the ship's armor like parasites. Within seconds, the cruiser's lights flickered and died. "All remaining ships, fall back to defensive position 7, he ordered. But even as he spoke, he knew it was hopeless. The swarm had anticipated their retreat routes. More creatures emerged from behind the debris of dead worlds, cutting off every escape vector. His tactical officer looked up from her station, her face pale with terror. "Sir, they're not just destroying us, they're studying us. Look at the scan date every time we fire a weapon. They adapt to it faster than before." The horrible truth hit Kethfer like a physical blow. The Void Swarm wasn't just winning this battle, they were using it as a learning experience. Every ship they destroyed, every weapon they analyzed, made them stronger for the next fight. A massive impact threw everyone on the bridge to the deck. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as systems began failing throughout the ship. Through the chaos, Kethfer could hear the sound that haunted his nightmares, the wet, drilling noise of swarm bioweapons eating through their hull. "Sir, we have multiple breaches on the lower decks," his damage control officer reported, voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The bioacid is spreading through the ventilation systems. We're losing entire sections." Kethfer pulled himself to his feet and moved to the emergency communication panel. His hands were steady as he activated the galaxy-wide distress beacon, even though he could smell the acrid smoke of melting circuits and dying electronics. "This is Admiral Kethfer of the Zephyrian Confederation." He spoke into the transmitter, his words carrying across space on all known frequencies. "The Void Swarm has broken through our defensive lines at Kepler 442. Our weapons are ineffective. They adapt to everything we throw at them." He paused as another explosion rocked the ship. Through the view screen he could see the last of his escort vessels disappearing into clouds of vaporized metal and flesh. "We are lost," he continued, his voice growing heavy with the weight of failure. "But someone must know. Someone must be warned. Don't let our sacrifice be meaningless. The swarm comes for you all." The transmission cut out as bioacid finally reached the communications array. Within hours, the creatures would begin consuming the planets themselves, adding their resources to an already unstoppable force. The galaxy had lost another defender, and the darkness grew stronger. The emergency session of the Galactic Coalition Council erupted into chaos the moment Admiral Kethver's final transmission ended. Representatives from 12 different species filled the great circular chamber, their voices rising in panic and desperation. The massive holographic display in the center showed the devastating aftermath at Kepler 442, nothing but debris and the dark shapes of swarm bioships feeding on planetary remains. Ambassador Velthara of the crystalline hegemony stood at her podium, her translucent form shimmering with agitation. 17 civilizations in 2 years, she announced, her voice carrying the harmonic tones of her species. "The mathematical progression is clear. At this rate, the swarm will reach the core worlds within 6 months." The representative from the aquatic depths, his environmental suit filled with murky water, gestured frantically with webbed hands. "Our stealth technology could help evacuate populations before the swarm arrives. We must begin immediate relocations to the Outer Rim territories." "Evacuation is surrender," countered the delegate from the Silicon Collective, his metallic voice ringing through the chamber. "We should combine our technologies. My people's quantum processors could calculate attack patterns that might exploit swarm weaknesses." Council Prime Nextari, an ancient being whose species had founded the Coalition 3,000 years ago, raised his hand for silence. His 6 eyes focused on the tactical data streaming across the displays. "Every engagement follows the same pattern," he said wearily. "Initial success, then rapid adaptation by the swarm. They learn from every weapon, every tactic. Our most advanced civilizations have fallen because their sophistication becomes their weakness." Meanwhile, in a distant corner of the galaxy, far from the political debates and desperate planning, Lieutenant Commander Jin sat in his small quarters aboard the exploration vessel, Horizon's Edge. The human ship was nothing impressive by galactic standard: screwed fusion engines, basic metal hull plating, and weapons that other species considered primitive. But Jin wasn't thinking about his ship's limitations as he studied the intercepted distress signal. The bridge of the Horizon's Edge was cramped compared to the spacious command centers of alien vessels. Jin's crew of 30 humans worked at stations that required manual controls rather than the thought interface systems used by more advanced species. When Jin entered, his navigation officer looked up from her charts. "Commander, that signal came from the Kepler system," she reported. "The data suggests a complete fleet engagement. Whoever sent it, they didn't make it out." Jin studied the tactical information, his jaw tightening as he processed the implications. The Void Swarm wasn't just another threat, it was something that had broken through defenses that should have been impregnable. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy for their plasma technology and energy manipulation. If they couldn't stop this enemy, what could? "Sir, we're receiving Coalition emergency broadcasts," his communications officer called out. They're calling for an assembly of all member species and allied forces. Are we allied forces? Asked the weapons officer, a young woman named Yuna, who had joined the crew only 6 months ago. Jin almost smiled at the question. Humanity had been making contact with galactic civilization for barely 50 years. Most species still considered them primitive warmongers who had somehow stumbled onto faster-than-light travel. The Coalition tolerated human presence in space, but had never formally invited them to join the Alliance. Navigation. Set course for Coalition space. Maximum burn, Jin ordered suddenly. His navigation officer blinked in surprise. Sir, that's way outside our patrol zone. Earth Command will want to know why we abandoned our survey mission. Earth Command isn't watching entire civilizations get wiped out, Jin replied firmly. Besides, when has humanity ever been good at following orders when people need help? The crew exchanged knowing looks. They had all heard the stories from their grandparents' stories about humans who rushed toward danger when others fled, who fought impossible odds because someone had to, who never learned when to quit. It was what made other species nervous about humanity, but it was also what made them human. As the horizon's edge changed course and accelerated toward the Coalition assembly point, Jin studied everything they knew about the Void Swarm. The tactical data was disturbing. These creatures didn't just attack, they consumed and adapted. Every victory made them stronger. Every new technology they encountered became part of their arsenal. Commander, his science officer said quietly, according to these reports, the swarm learns from every engagement. They adapt to energy weapons, kinetic weapons, even exotic matter manipulation. What makes you think we can help? Jin looked at the data one more time, then at his crew humans who used projectile weapons when other species wielded plasma, who relied on nuclear fusion when others had mastered antimatter, who still fought their wars with metal and explosives instead of reality-altering technologies. Maybe that's exactly why we can help, he said slowly. Every species that fought them was more advanced than us. They had technologies the swarm could learn from, adapt to, steal. But what happens when you face an enemy that fights with tools you've never seen before? Not because they're more advanced, but because they're simpler. The horizon's edge continued its journey toward Coalition space, carrying with it a species that the galaxy had dismissed as primitive. But sometimes, Jin reflected, the most primitive solution was exactly what a complex problem needed. They would find out soon enough whether humanity's reputation for doing the impossible was deserved, or if they were simply about to become the swarm's next learning experience. The Coalition Emergency Assembly Hall buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from across the galaxy gathered in desperate council. Jin stood at the entrance, feeling distinctly out of place among beings who manipulated matter with their thoughts and traveled between dimensions as easily as walking through a door. His simple military uniform looked crude, next to the shimmering robes and advanced environmental suits of the other delegates. Ambassador Velthara noticed him first, her crystalline form catching the light as she turned. A human, she said, her harmonic voice carrying surprise and barely concealed disdain. This assembly is for Coalition members and their allies. Your species has observer status at best. Jin stepped forward, keeping his voice respectful but firm. Ma'am, we intercepted the distress signals. We know what's happening out there. Humanity wants to help. A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the assembled delegates. The representative from the Silicon Collective, his metallic body gleaming under the chamber lights, spoke with electronic precision. Help. Your species lacks energy shields, plasma manipulation, or even basic gravitic control. You fight with projectile weapons and chemical explosives. What could you possibly contribute to a conflict that has destroyed our most advanced civilizations? Before Jin could respond, a scarred figure entered the chamber. Admiral Kethfer moved slowly, his blue-scaled skin bearing terrible marks from bioacid burns. The alien admiral's presence silenced the room, He was the only fleet commander to survive direct engagement with the Void Swarm. Desperation makes strange allies, Kethver said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of recent losses. He studied Jin with tired eyes that had seen too much death. Human, I watched the swarm tear through plasma shields that could deflect stellar radiation. I saw them adapt to quantum torpedoes and Tell me, what weapons does your species possess that could succeed where our most advanced technology has failed? Jin straightened, meeting the Admiral's gaze. Sir, we don't have advanced technology. Our ships use metal armor instead of energy. Shields, our weapons fire, solid projectiles, and nuclear warheads. Most of our tactics come from fighting wars on our home planet. Primitive, muttered the delegate from the psionic collective, her mental voice echoing in everyone's minds. How does primitive weaponry help against an enemy that adapts to everything? Maybe because it's primitive, Jin replied. Every species that fought the swarm had something in common. They used sophisticated technology the swarm could learn from. Energy manipulation, exotic matter, reality-altering weapons. But what happens when the enemy faces something so simple there's nothing complex to adapt to? Kethver leaned forward, interest flickering in his weary eyes. Explain. Jin activated a small holographic projector, showing basic schematics of human weapons. A railgun accelerates a metal slug using magnetic fields. There's no energy signature to adapt to, no exotic particles to analyze. It's just mass moving very fast. A nuclear warhead is a fusion reaction, the same process that powers stars. The swarm might adapt to the delivery system, but they can't adapt to physics itself. The chamber fell silent as the delegates studied the crude but effective human weapons. Ambassador Valthera's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been consideration. Your theories are interesting, but theory means nothing without numbers. How many ships can your people provide? A few dozen scouts to buy evacuation time. Jin took a deep breath, knowing his next words would shock the assembly. Ma'am, when Earth Command received the emergency broadcasts, they activated the full human defense fleet. We're mobilizing everything: exploration ships, cargo haulers, mining vessels, colony transports, anything that can mount weapons and travel faster than light. Everything? Kethver asked, his voice sharp with sudden attention. Define everything. 12,000 ships, sir. Maybe more by the time we reach the staging area. The silence that followed was deafening. The assembled delegates stared at Jin, as if he had just claimed humans could breathe in space. The delegate from the aquatic depths was the first to speak, his voice bubbling through his environmental suit. Impossible. No single species maintains fleets of that size. The logistics alone would be. Humans don't really do peacetime, Jin interrupted. We've been fighting wars for our entire history. Every ship we build can be converted to military use if needed. Every civilian knows basic combat training. When we heard about the swarm, our leaders didn't debate whether to help. They debated how fast we could get there. Kethver stood slowly, his scarred form commanding attention from every delegate in the chamber. Commander Jin, I have seen what the Void Swarm can do. They destroyed my entire fleet in less than 3 hours. They adapt to every weapon, counter every tactic, learn from every engagement. Your crude technology might work for 1 battle, maybe 2, but eventually they will find weaknesses to exploit. Jin nodded solemnly. You're probably right, Admiral. But here's the thing about humans. We don't just have one plan. When plan A fails, we try plan B. When that fails, we make up plan C on the spot. We keep fighting until we find something that works, or until there's nothing left to fight with. The Admiral studied the young human officer for a long moment, seeing something in Jin's eyes that reminded him of his own determination before the swarm had broken his fleet. Very well, Commander. Coordinate with our remaining forces at the Centauri staging area. But understand this enemy adapts to everything we throw at it. Your weapons may become useless within minutes of engagement. Jin smiled grimly, the expression carrying generations of human stubbornness. With respect, Admiral, our weapons don't give enemies time to adapt. We hit hard, we hit fast, and we keep hitting until the problem goes away. When the human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the Centauri staging area, even Admiral Kethver's battle-hardened composure cracked. The space around the system filled with ships, not the few dozen vessels he had expected, but an armada that stretched beyond the horizon of space itself. Thousands upon thousands of human warships materialized in perfectly coordinated formations, their crude metal hulls gleaming under the system's twin suns. Captain Minho stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Iron Resolve, watching the tactical displays as his fleet took position. Unlike the elegant, flowing designs of coalition vessels, human ships looked like what they were: weapons built for war, angular hull plating, massive gun batteries, and armor thick enough to stop asteroid impacts. They moved with purposeful aggression that made the alien observers nervous. All fleet elements, this is Iron Resolve Actual, Minho announced over the communication channels. We have operational command of the Joint Task Force. Coalition vessels will provide targeting data and electronic warfare support. Human ships will handle the heavy lifting. Admiral Kethver watched from his temporary command ship, still struggling to process what he was seeing. The human formations confused every military doctrine he knew, where coalition fleets moved in precise, defensive patterns designed to maximize shield coverage and energy weapon efficiency. The humans spread out in loose, aggressive formations that seemed almost reckless. Their tactical positioning makes no sense, his tactical officer observed, studying the human fleet movements. They're leaving gaps in their formations that enemy forces could exploit, and they're moving too close together for effective energy weapon deployment. They don't use energy weapons, Kethver reminded him quietly. Look at their gun positions. Every ship is designed to deliver maximum kinetic firepower in the shortest possible time. The Void Swarm appeared at the edge of the system like a spreading cancer, their biomechanical forms pulsing with alien hunger. Hundreds of the creatures emerged from hyperspace, each one the size of a battleship, but moving with organic fluidity. They had grown since the last engagement. Admiral Kethver could see new weapon configurations. Armor patterns adapted from the technologies they had consumed. Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, reported the human sensor operator aboard Iron Resolve. Multiple bioships, estimated 500 plus. They're moving in that same herding pattern we saw in the tactical reports. Captain Minho studied the approaching swarm with cold calculation. These creatures had destroyed 17 civilizations, adapted to every weapon system they encountered, learned from every engagement. But they had never faced anything like what was about to hit them. All ships, weapons free, he announced calmly. Remember the drill. We don't dance with these things. We hit them so hard they don't get back up. The engagement began with a storm of violence that stunned the coalition observers. Human railguns fired solid projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed, the metal slugs hitting with kinetic energy that could crack continents, while swarm bioarmor tried desperately to adapt to the impacts. The next wave of projectiles was already tearing through their hulls. Nuclear warheads detonated in precisely calculated patterns, creating overlapping kill zones of fusion fire and radiation. The swarm creatures writhed and twisted, their organic systems trying to process threats they had never encountered. Simple, brutal physics delivered with overwhelming force, but what truly shocked Admiral Kethver was the human willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. When Captain Yuri's heavy cruiser Defiant Star suffered critical damage from swarm bioacid, she didn't retreat to safety. Instead, she aimed her dying ship directly at the largest bioorganism in the enemy formation. All hands, abandon ship, Yuri announced over the communication channels, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. I'm taking this monster with me. The evacuation pods launched in the final seconds as Yuri rammed her ship into the swarm creature at full velocity. The impact released the energy of a small nuclear weapon, vaporizing both vessels in a brilliant flash that lit up the entire battlefield. "This is insane," breathed Ambassador Velthara from her observation post. "They're throwing away their ships like expendable resources." Admiral Kethver watched another human captain make the same choice, driving his damaged vessel into a cluster of swarm bioships rather than let them escape to adapt and learn. "No," he said quietly. "They're not throwing anything away. They're trading their lives to make sure these creatures don't live to threaten others." The human fleet formed gun lines across space, each ship pouring devastating firepower into the swarm formations, where coalition vessels danced and maneuvered with elegant precision. Human warships planted themselves like immovable fortresses and simply refused to yield ground. When swarm creatures tried to close for boarding actions, they met walls of explosive shells and nuclear fire. The tide turned when human tactics finally broke the swarm's coordination networks. The biomechanical creatures had evolved to counter sophisticated technology, to adapt and learn from complex weapon systems, but they couldn't adapt fast enough to humanity's combination of simple weapons delivered with absolute ruthlessness. As the last swarm bioship burned in the void, its adaptive systems finally overwhelmed by the relentless human assault, silence fell across the battlefield. The space around Centauri was filled with debris, burning wreckage, and the scattered remains of an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. Captain Minho surveyed the damage reports: 30% casualties, dozens of ships lost, thousands of human lives sacrificed for victory. But the void swarm that had terrorized the galaxy was finally dead. Their threat ended by species the galaxy had dismissed as primitive. The age of human military respect had begun. The aftermath of the battle at Centauri stretched across space like a graveyard of giants. Twisted wreckage from both human ships and swarm bioorganisms drifted in the void, slowly cooling from white-hot metal to cold debris. The silence felt strange after hours of constant weapons fire and the screaming of torn hull plating. Admiral Kethver approached the human flagship Iron Resolve in his small shuttle, still trying to process what he had witnessed. The human dreadnought bore terrible scars from the engagement tenor sections of armor. Plating had been melted away by bioacid, emergency patches covered hull breaches, and scorch marks ran along the length of the ship like battle wounds. Yet it maintained position with the rest of the human fleet, ready to fight again if needed. The corridors of the Iron Resolve told the story of desperate combat. Human crew members moved with quiet efficiency, welding damaged bulkheads and replacing burned-out systems. Many bore injuries, bandaged arms, singed uniforms, the hollow look of people who had seen friends die. But none of them complained, and none of them seemed ready to quit. Captain Minho met the alien admiral in the ship's main briefing room, a cramped space that served multiple functions aboard the practical human vessel. Unlike the Grand Command centers of coalition ships, everything here was built for function over form. The furniture was simple metal, the displays showed basic tactical information, and the walls were lined with emergency equipment. Admiral Kethver Minho said, standing as the scarred alien officer entered. Despite his exhaustion, the human captain maintained military courtesy. "Thank you for coming aboard. I know this hasn't been easy for any of us." Kethver studied the human officer, seeing something he hadn't expected, not pride or arrogance over their victory, but a quiet sadness for the cost of that victory. "Captain Minho, I must ask you something that has been troubling me. Your tactics. They shouldn't have worked. The swarm was designed to counter sophisticated technology, to adapt and learn from every engagement. How did you know that simple kinetic weapons would succeed where our most advanced systems failed?" Minho sat down heavily, the weight of command and loss evident in his posture. "Honestly, Admiral, we didn't know. We hoped, but we didn't know. The thing is, When you're facing extinction, you don't get to choose the perfect solution. You use what you have and hope it's enough. But the sacrifice, Kethver pressed. I watched Captain Yuri ram her ship into that bioorganism. I saw dozens of your people make the same choice. That level of ... devotion is beyond my understanding. The human captain was quiet for a moment, staring at a memorial display that showed the faces of crew members lost in the battle. Admiral, my people have a saying: nobody gets left behind. When we see others in danger, when civilizations are being wiped out, we don't calculate odds or worry about profit margins. We just show up and do whatever it takes. Meanwhile, in the great assembly hall of the Coalition Council, the emergency session had resumed with a very different atmosphere. The same representatives who had dismissed humanity as primitive warmongers now competed for the chance to speak with the human delegates. Ambassador Felsada, her crystalline form shimmering with what might have been embarrassment, approached Jin at the main podium. Commander Jin, she said, her harmonic voice carefully respectful. The crystalline hegemony would like to discuss joint defense initiatives with your people. Our shield technology combined with your weapons systems could create formidable defensive capabilities. Jin nodded politely, but his attention was focused on the formal documents being prepared at the center of the chamber. The first Human Coalition Defense Pact was taking shape, a treaty that would fundamentally change the balance of power in the galaxy. Council Prime, next Hari, the ancient being who had led the coalition for centuries, stood to address the assembly. Today marks a turning point in galactic history. We have learned that sometimes the most complex problems require the simplest solutions. Delivered with absolute determination, the human species has demonstrated qualities that we had forgotten: the willingness to sacrifice everything for others, the refusal to accept defeat, and the courage to face impossible odds. Admiral Yuna, of the Human Defense Fleet, recently promoted after the battle, stepped forward to sign the treaty. Unlike the flowing robes and advanced environmental suits of the other delegates, she wore a simple military uniform bearing the scars of recent combat. Her words were equally simple and direct. The galaxy is vast and dangerous, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the great chamber. There will always be threats that seem impossible to defeat, enemies that adapt to every weapon, challenges that break the strongest civilizations. When that happens, when extinction comes knocking, remember this day. Remember that humans don't know how to quit. We specialize in impossible odds, and we make the impossible look routine. The treaty signing concluded with representatives from dozens of species requesting military partnerships with humanity. The beings who had once dismissed human technology now sought to learn from human determination. Defense contracts, joint training programs, and shared research initiatives filled the agenda for months to come. As the assembly dispersed, a new motto spread across coalition space with remarkable speed. It appeared on military broadcasts, civilian networks, and diplomatic communications throughout the galaxy. When facing the end, call the humans. They make the impossible look routine. The age of human military dominance had begun, built not on superior technology, but on something far more powerful: the absolute refusal to let others face extinction alone. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again.